studio, Dom Emhrem Noland, Mark Emhrem Noland of the Holy Cross Monastery in the Valley of St. Brona in Rostrevor. How are you?
Well.
You look good. It's good to see you. It's a while since we've been talking.
Is it well?
It is.
It's a sign that you're not coming to the monastery as much as you should, Ron.
I love the
You're
notion
so
that
busy
I
with
should.
television.
No, I'm not. I promise you, I'm not. I'm on my constancy of pilgrimage in the world out there. I'm doing things that are kind of my monastic experience. But maybe it'd be nice to. It's very hard to get a good intellectual sermon nowadays.
There are a class of monks who are called the Girovags.
What are they?
They're the ones who wander all over the place. So I'd say you're probably a Girovag
I'm a
more than a monk of stability.
Do you know where I go? And this is a new thing for me that the schools are built in Africa, right? They're done, dusted. And on St. Patrick's Day, Bullis, the African bishop, Tim Carroll, our bishop there previously, has gone home. He's retired. No more Europeans there. And Bullis is a Canberra man, the first Canberra man to be a bishop, a priest, the first Canberra priest to be a bishop, and he's now in charge. But he phoned me on St. Patrick's Day, and I said, Rowan, I am ringing you to wish you a happy St. Patrick. And this was on, and then I was tired because I sleep a bit when I'm in here. At home at night, I go to bed early to rest for the 3 o'clock out of bed. 3 o'clock out of bed every day. I bet that impresses you, Mr. Monk, sir.
Definitely does. Definitely does.
But then I got a call from Paulina, the OLA sister, who's the headmistress of the primary school. And there was this output, and I was going to go to sleep, and I felt, this was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I thought, I can't bother getting up. The phone rang. There was this outpouring of African happiness and joy and laughter, and wishing you a happy Patrick's Day, and all of this is coming through. And you couldn't lie on after that, and I was up and away and again. But listen, this is about you, not me. Okay. How are you doing? How's the monastery going?
Monastery's going well. Monastery is busy. Monks are busy people. People think that we just walk around the cloisters and stroll around the grounds and do nothing.
It's important
but
to
in
do
fact,
that
yeah, it is. But monks are inclined to be busy people as well.
Yeah.
Busy with the ordinary running of the monastery, but also, well, Christ comes to the door in the guest so many times a day, and sometimes Christ comes to the door in the guest who's in distress, and you don't think this is going to happen today. You've programmed that you will be walking around the grounds or sitting in your study or whatever, and then someone in need arrives at the door, and you
I said that in my introduction this morning, my social media promotion of the program today. I said the Benedictine monks of Rostrevor, you'll not know what they do because you think they do very little but pray. But there is a constancy of calls to the door, which they answer. When people are broken and washed up on the sort of high tide mark of their lives, or the water leaves them and they've nowhere else to go, they go to the monastery. And that's exactly that's your charism. That's why you went there.
And sometimes it's that they choose to go to the monastery, or sometimes it's just that the tide washes them onto that shore and they find themselves there, like a young guy the other day who was in great distress, and someone said to him, where are you? Well, I'm in the grounds of this monastery. Well, then go and ask to speak to someone, and so something happens.
He was told to go by in a call he got.
He was in distress.
Yeah.
He just happened to pull the car in there.
Yeah.
Not to come in to see the monks, but eventually when he got someone on the other end, said, go and speak to someone. And so the story went on and lasted maybe 5 or 6 hours after that, and we got him the help that he needed by the end of the day. And this sort of thing that happens.
So you would reach out in order to help the Christ who comes. You would reach out beyond the monastery to the relevant
and it's for
body.
Us usually it is welcoming in rather than reaching out. Well, I think it's very important for us to realize that at the very heart of our monastic calling is what I think of as a ministry of compassion. You know, the Buddhists have that notion as well. You know, none of us lives just for ourselves alone.
Yeah.
The life and the death of each one of us has its impact upon others, and I think if we've got that openness, and it's not that we put a sign in the local paper or whatever, please come to the monastery if you're in distress, nothing like that.
No.
But just people pick up when they are going to find a welcome, when they're going to find a listening ear, when they're going to find understanding, and they turn up.
Yeah. Yeah.
from across the board, different ages, different social backgrounds, and of course in Northern Ireland, that's important, from different political and religious traditions, because we would find that half of those who come to the monastery come from the Protestant churches,
Yeah, of course.
from Loyalist, Unionist tradition.
Yeah.
And we would also find that the vast, vast majority of the young people who come from that background.
Yeah. Before we get into the nature, respecting confidentiality, of course, but before we get into the nature of the challenges that people face and bring to your door, I think, how long are you now here in the area?
We
Was it 10
arrived
years?
we're 10 years in the monastery. 2004 was the opening of the monastery. There was a journalist called Rowan Hand who was there and doing lots of
we remember.
things. Yeah,
We remember.
that was in your youth.
It was very much in my youth, I
But
tell you.
in fact, we were living in Rostrevor for nearly 6 years previous to that, because we arrived in January 1998.
Yeah,
And
goodness gracious.
we met you actually not that long after. We met you probably around about
Yeah.
2000, 2001. Yeah.
Do you know the reason I came to you? You might well remember the photograph. Magnificent photograph in the Irish News.
Yes, that's
Of the three or four of you.
yeah,
They're standing there and the light coming through the window.
Yeah.
And I said, I must go and see these people.
Yeah. And,
And
I
that's
remember you coming with this beard that you'd grown
beard,
for Christmas.
Ah!
And then you came to the door and someone said, he sounds like that guy who was here before, but I don't think it's him. It doesn't look like him. Because the beard had disappeared, you know.
But isn't it funny? The beard at Christmas still goes. And this past Christmas, the beard alone earned 5,500 for Father Donal in his school, in our school in Africa, in northwest Nigeria. And it was only a matter of just going to people's
I'm going to
homes.
give you a real challenge, Rowan.
Right, go for it.
When has the head been shaved?
Sure, that's easy done. You've seen me with a shorn head before. Goodness gracious. Ah, yeah. But I've discovered we're talking about wandering ministries and what people do in their lives. And I think it's the challenge for everyone out there who professes an interest in the search for God. The challenge is to do something about it.
And I think the real thing that should happen and does happen is so many people are doing so many things without realizing it.
Yeah.
And that's when you realize that this is the work of God
Yeah.
in and through you, in and through them, rather than what we set out to do for God. And quite often, when we set out to do something for God, we're setting out to accomplish our project. We've taken things in hand. We're in control. But you know, I've seen so many stories, or heard so many stories, and seen so many examples of people just going about their ordinary, everyday, I wouldn't even say their business, just their way of being, and reflecting loving kindness and generosity and compassion. And you know, 5 years later, 10 years later, you realize how that impacted someone. Do you know? And I think that's where it really is a question of the life and the death of each one of us has its impact upon others.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have taken my own crusade takes me these days down to Brother Kevin every Saturday in Dublin. He works at the Capuchins, and wonderful human being, wonderful people who go there, and wonderful people who serve them by simply feeding them. And the last Saturday, my task was pouring the coffee and the tea, and the people are very, very seriously challenged with their addictions, and they do their best, but they're still. And one woman came to the table for her tea, and she looked, and I was wearing a tiny little cross about that size, made of bamboo, and it was given to me 5 years ago in Chennai in India by the Don Gwinnellan order. We just helped them with one or two little things, and they wanted to say thanks. And I don't know why I wore it down, because I don't normally wear a cross going down. But I thought to myself, I'll put it on. The woman came, she saw this thing. Her eyes lit up almost. There's a subliminal grace in her face from brokenness to, I can't believe. She said, that's beautiful, the cross. She said, please give me that. was all you could do. So the cross,
And that's where it is
God in
transition.
India
we
was meant-
receive from someone and we pass it on.
Wow.
Do you know, and that's where we realise, well, you were with Capuchins, you know,
Yeah.
Francis of Assisi's word.
Yeah.
Sometimes translated, make me an instrument of your peace, but an instrument sounds a bit like a hammer, you know.
Yeah.
Make me a channel.
A channel of your peace.
And just
is the
let it
beautiful
go through,
thing.
you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's where
Yeah.
it's, when we allow ourselves to be, that demands also, of course, that we become a bit emptied of ourselves so that something other than ourselves can
Yeah,
flow
but
through us
ourselves
and
isn't all that palatable, really. It's nice to empty all the rubbish and fill it with more important things. Because you're responsible in some measure for where I am, because between yourself and between the SMAs and between Africa and between India and the Donalds, I find myself walking that walk quietly and trying to do the right thing. And it's the easiest thing in the world for me to pull the plug on me. Because if I were to sit down and write all my failings for you, you'd never talk to me again. Do you know?
Why not?
Oh, you'd hate me for it. You'd say,
Why not? No, you hate yourself for it. That's not nice. You know, and we're all a bit in the same boat.
Yeah, yeah.
But you know what really, what is it that lifts us up is the regard of someone else who sees, yes, I've all that, but there's something else. I remember a meeting I had with Abbot Paul Gramo, who had been Abbot of Beck, father of the community for 48 years, and he was dying of terminal cancer, and not long before his death, I was meeting with him one Sunday afternoon, and so he started to speak to me, his perception of me and qualities and what he expected of me for the future and other. And I said to him, but Father, there's this, there's that, and there's, you know, all the things that I might be inclined to hate myself for. And he said, of course I see that. I said, but that's in the valley. You know, and he had a military background in France. It's not because you're a member of a religious order or clergy that you're not called up in time of war. In the Second World War, he'd been in the Narvik campaign and all the rest of it, you know. But he sort of then used, and he would often use that kind of military kind of language. He was a very, he was a very peaceful man, but he did have military language. But you know, you've got to aim at the height on the other side. If we get bogged down in the valley, we've lost the battle. You know, and that's where the valley's there, and you're aware of that.
Yeah.
Because the enemy's lurking there. But
Yeah.
you're heading for the
Yeah.
height on the other side.
I think it's the wisdom of seeing that and allowing yourself simply to be and to be open. It's like a polarity thing, negative and positive. If you're there, open to whatever's coming from God, and I
It's
find
about
that,
living with contradictions,
yeah.
and we're all full of them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I
Now,
know.
some of us are lucid enough to realise we are full of them, and some
Yeah.
of us are daft enough to think, no, we're all good or we're all bad.
No.
But we live with
No,
contradictions.
there's that, yeah.
And the balance is holding the contradictions.
The origins of the order in Rostrevor, I think it's no bad thing this far down the road to remind people whence you came and why you came to this part of the world.
Well, we'll start with the creation of the world and work our way. Well, maybe just to tell you who we are and what we are. We're a community of Benedictine monks. So Benedict wrote a rule for monks 1,500 years ago, a bit more than 1,500 years ago. And it's basically a rule of life in which, and he says it clearly in the prologue, so even before he begins the rule, that's sort of the preamble, he says, let us set out with the gospel as our guide. So it seeks to be a life according to the gospel. Benedictinism contributed greatly to the development of Europe, you could say, through the monasteries, which were centres of learning, which were centres of gospel living, which had a big influence on culture. And our particular monastery, the monastery I entered in Beck, was a monastery founded in the 11th century in 1034, and it became one of the important centres in European Christianity. St. Anselm, for example, was Abbot of Beck, and anyone who's done a little bit of philosophy and will have come across the anthropological argument and all the rest of it will know that Anselm marked Christian thought with his ontological argument. Whether you believe in it, whether you don't, is another question. But
What is that argument?
you know, about proving the existence of God.
Oh, for goodness sake. Yeah, it's my constancy.
But anyway,
But I've got to the point now I feel I don't need to prove it anymore. I've left it alone.
you're living through it. It's okay. But anyway, so this monastery had many historic links with England through the Norman conquest,
Yes.
and we built on those to establish many ecumenical links in the 20th century. And the Abbey of Bec, therefore, was sensitive to the whole question of disunity among Christians, or rather sensitive to Christ's call to work for the unity among Christians. And that led us to show an interest in Northern Ireland in the 1980s. And we had a small presence, a hidden life of prayer lived by 2 monks in Northern Ireland from 83 to 87.
Were you one of those two?
I was one of those
Yeah.
2 monks. I was a young monk at the time. In fact, just before my solemn profession, I was sent. Made solemn profession at Bec, mind you, but it was in my early formation years. And then, some 10 years later, after we'd returned to Bec, Pope John Paul II reminded contemplative monasteries that they had a responsibility in regard to the world in places where there was conflict, especially when that conflict had religious roots and basis to it. And that we could, specifically by the ministry of prayer and hospitality, contribute something to unity among Christians and among people who are of different traditions. And it doesn't take that much imagination to see Northern Ireland in that context. And so it was in 1997 that the challenge was presented to us to return to Northern Ireland, but this time to establish a permanent monastery, which would be a place where we would live our monastic life, but with that openness. We didn't come to do ecumenism, we didn't come to do reconciliation, but to be men, monks, who are striving to arrive at unity within themselves, striving to live a parable of communion by their life shared together, and who would be open to that. And what we found is, without publishing who we were, what we were here for, that just happened, and that people from all traditions come to the monastery, and they have found there a place of welcome and hospitality and dialogue.
Hold that thought, because we'll take a break for some music now, and we'll pick it up now on your arrival and the settlement of the monastery and where it went from there.
Okay.
Back momentarily.